Dr. Lisa Eliason, licensed professional counselor and AASECT certified sex therapist. Today we're going to continue on with our series about basic communication skills. And for today's project, we're going to work on listening. This is a tricky one, so hopefully we'll be able to get a chance to practice some of this and learn about how to really be good listeners when we're responding to our spouse. Now, I found the easiest way to explain listening, especially reflective listening, is active listening, we call it sometimes too, is to give you some of the examples of how I learned it, and that'll help you dissect and digest the meaning of why this is important to you. It's easy, I think, on the surface to think that it's almost one of these things that's so simple that people struggle to do it because it's hard. Reminds me of that story in the Old Testament when people wanted to be healed from the snakes and all they had to do was look at the snake on the stick, but people struggled to do it because it was too simple. That they keep looking for a hard solution. So basic reflective listening statement begins with, I think, a sensory data piece of information. Like I hear or I see, like I hear you say or I hear you see. I see that you feel. Kind of a reflective statement. I hear, I see, can start off and kick off your good reflective statement. I found the best way to teach people how to do this is for me to give you some examples of how I learned it and why I learned it was important and very powerful. And from that, you'll get the gist of what you can be doing at home with your family and with your spouse to better understand their feeling experience. First thing we're going to have to do, though, is let's say your partner brings you an I feel statement. And you have to learn to calm yourself, take a breath, manage your anxiety over what they said, manage that urge to go in and fix and give them information. Now, I say that because there are three possible ways you can respond when your partner gives you the I feel statement. You can respond with information giving, that let me explain my point of view, why I did what I did, or silence. Silence is a form of communication. As you well know, if somebody's not talked to you for a while, the message was clear. So silence does speak much, but again, it's kind of that nonverbal expression that's like using a big paintbrush. It has lots of color, but it doesn't have the fine definition that words have to help us see what is actually in that picture. And so we have information giving, silence, and then the last one is what I call reflection and connection. It's building the connection with somebody, understanding what the world looks like from their point of view, without adding information to it. I have to tell you, our pros at this are the people who are trained in play therapy because what they often do with little kids is they might, what they call, you don't want to lead the witness, right? When you're working with children. And so they'll do a lot of just describing what the child does in play. They might say, oh, I see the princess got in the sandbox, or I see the alligator bit the prince. And they just start describing what the experience is so that the person with the story can just let the story unfold. And so where they're not contaminating the story with their information. They're letting the child just tell the story, especially with children, because if children get the sense adults expect something out of that story, they'll start responding to that expectation and won't just tell you the story clean. So also important though with our partners, if we want to connect and understand their story, then we have to be careful not to lead the witness. So that's what I think of it, as leading the witness instead of just letting it unfold, letting them show me the journey of what it was meaningful to them. Let me tell you, one of the first places that I found this is important, when I was in graduate school and I first learned how to do this listening technique, I happened to be fortunate enough that I worked at a mental health clinic, psychiatry, where we happened to have a particular population of client base that yelled at people a lot. So it was very common that I'd be at work and somebody would come in and just chew us out. And I learned quickly that if blood pressure's high, problem solving, information, giving information to somebody who's worked up, your information's going to bounce off. It's not going to soak up and sink in because they're not in a place where they can process that information. And so I learned, if they come in and they're yelling at me, better to reflect, which means I might say things like, I hear that you're frustrated. I can see that you wish your doctor was on time, or whatever it is. And I would just understand their experience until I saw they were calm enough to begin to take in that new information that I had for them. Another thing I often did too is I would ask permission before I launch into solving somebody's problem with information. I might say, hey, I have a perspective on this, but I really want to hear your point of view and hear what it looks like to you before I share mine. I have found as a counselor often waiting and getting more information that the client will tell me the solution and I don't have to work as hard. So, because they often have that information if I just get enough of the story and unpack the story. And how I do that often is this reflective listening. So I might, if they're upset and they come in and they're yelling, I might say, I hear you're frustrated. And they go, yeah, I'm frustrated. And I go, yeah, this sounds like it's really bothering you. I might reflect 3 or 4 times just so I can hear more of that story. The other thing that reflection is good for is it checks to be sure, is my understanding of what they're telling me, am I getting the message they intended to send? Sometimes we might intend to say something and the way the listener received it might not be the way we had intended to say it. I often point out that technically we know what we said and we know what we hear. We don't know what the other person said. All we know is what we heard them say. So I often learn that language of what I said is, or I heard you say is. So that reflection, I hear, I see, is a good place to start. Second place that I learned this lesson, the second place that I learned this lesson was from one of my sons. He was 3, and I was developing this skill at that point in time. It was a few years ago. I won't bother with how long ago that was. But I was developing this skill, and I had this moment where I'm making dinner, and my toddler son, he was just at that age where they're starting to talk. They still have some tantrums, still haven't learned to label their feelings well. And so I'm making dinner, and I'm sitting here cooking, and my toddler comes up to me, and he's some of you may have experienced this. He's kind of at my ankles, and you can see the tantrum on the horizon. And he comes to my ankles, and he's saying, I want a cookie. Mom, I want a cookie. Matter of fact, insisting he wants a cookie. And I am providing him with all that useful information that every toddler wants to know, like 4 basic food groups, nutrition, after dinner stuff. I'm just so surprised that a toddler didn't want to know the 4 basic food groups. So I'm trying to explain this, and each time I give him a piece of useful information, I noticed that tantrum still escalating just a little bit more. And you know that feeling sometimes when you're getting that from your kid, you love them, you want to care for them, but you don't know what to do. You're exhausted, and you kind of feel an urge to pull away. However, as I'm cooking, bless the heart of my child here, he tended to be the one that he was a really independent kid, but he also lived at the mercy of a household with multiple children where he might be the one who's taking a nap at a soccer game or in the car, or what I term side parenting at a phase in life where here we are, where I'm side parenting, I'm cooking while I'm trying to have a meaningful conversation with him about the 4 basic food groups. So yeah, we see how this is going. And so I said to him something, all that training finally clicked in my head, and I stopped and I thought to myself, when's the last time I actually looked this kid in the eyeballs and had a meaningful conversation on his level? Now, I'm going to tell you, if the answer to that question is, 2 weeks ago, this is a connection problem going on. If my answer was 20 minutes ago, this is a behavior problem. Well, darn it, it was 2 weeks ago probably. It was longer than it should have been. And it occurred to me that to this kid, what he knew was that at some point in the past, he had meaningful connecting moments, probably over cookies. He didn't have the language yet to come in and say, hey, Mom, I really haven't connected with you in a while. I would love to sit down and visit over, I don't know, hot chocolate. I mean, he didn't have that. What he had is, I want a cookie. So he's at my ankles. He's telling me he wants a cookie. Well, I kind of get to a stopping point in my cooking, and I set it aside. I squat down on his level, and I look him in the eyes, and I reflect. I just say, I can see you're frustrated when you can't get a cookie. I can hear that you really want a cookie. I even was able to give him a little bit in fantasy of saying, if you could have a cookie, what kind would you have? And I just experienced that frustration with him, so we didn't have to be alone there. I walked the journey with him just a little bit. Now, sure enough, he's my most independent child. So a few minutes of that, and that kiddo disappears to go play again with the siblings. He's happy and moves on. Now, here's what I suspect. I suspect that if I had given him a cookie in that moment, he would have been right back 10 minutes later looking for another cookie and mad at me that it wasn't going to have one. What I did was connect with him, didn't change my dinner plan, didn't change a thing I was doing. I just connected where he was and let him share his journey and experience, his struggle with me. I didn't rush to fix his struggle. I trusted he can fix his own struggle. He just needed somebody to walk the journey. So that was one powerful place. Now, the thing I learned in that interaction was for this difference in information giving versus reflecting and connecting. If I give information and somebody wants connection, they will get frustrated with me. As you saw, when he said, I want a cookie, and I'm like, 4 basic food groups, he was getting increasingly frustrated because that wasn't really what he was looking for. He just didn't have the words to tell me what he was looking for. Now, it works the other way too. If somebody wants information and you give them connection, reflection language, they'll get frustrated with you too. Like imagine you come to me and say, Lisa, can you hand me that water bottle? And I go, I can see you would like a water bottle. You sound thirsty. That person's gonna go, yeah, hand me the bottle already. And I'm gonna go, huh, you must really be thirsty. It sounds frustrating. They'll escalate until I hear they want the information. So here's what I do. And this is what I learned with my son, is I try once, twice, a technique of information give, if they seem to be getting increasingly frustrated with that. Then I switch and I go, okay, maybe we need connection here. And I try that out. Oh, I see you're frustrated. And so I try to move between the two based on the feedback I'm getting from that other person. Are they getting more frustrated, or are they finding, if, like I'll say I give information and they go, thank you for informing me on those 4 basic food groups. That's exactly what I needed. Okay, it worked. Great, move on. Information giving is a language of education. It's also important. As a matter of fact, I tend to think that in our scriptures, when we talk about Mary and Martha, one cleaning the kitchen, one at Christ's feet, that what we're talking about is the difference in this, is that information giving, get things done language versus connection language and build relationship. Now, I'll tell you about the last place I learned how powerful, and there really is research that shows that this connecting and reflecting with people can lower blood pressure, can calm and soothe the soul and the body, and so improve communication. But the last place that was really important to me where I learned this is years ago. I had a friend who had struggled with cancer for a long time. She'd gone through several rounds of breast cancer treatment. And she had a child who ended up being one of the best friends of my child. I still love that kid to this day. And, this woman had really given up much of her life, her career and many things, to be available and be a part of her child's life. But here she is. By the time this child's getting ready to get out of high school, here's this woman struggling with cancer. And we kind of all know she's going to die. And it's tragic. Like, there is just no way to sugarcoat that and make it pretty. Now, she's my friend, so I would go sit with her because I didn't need her to be alone in that struggle. However, I gotta say, I had no useful information to give her. She'd been through, years of this treatment. I had no, did you try this that I could do that was useful to her in any way. And so I would sit with her and she would tell me about her fears of leaving her son, or the love she had for her family, and really that struggle of facing those end years of her life. And I would sit there and go, yeah, I can see it's hard. I can see that you're really working on this. I can see you're worried about him. I hear that you're worried. And I thought, I can walk that journey with her. I can't do it the whole way, but I can go a block. I can go a little bit. So when she faces this challenge, a real challenge, she doesn't necessarily have to face it all by herself. She can have friends, family, people to walk the journey with her. Now, I think that's the story when Christ goes and talks about his experience in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he wonders why his friends, his apostle friends, are falling asleep. Now, they can't do the atonement for him. They can't do that experience, but they can walk the journey with him. They can be there, and so he doesn't have to face it completely alone and by himself. So that's kind of what I learned in that experience, that this reflective language is really a language of how do I connect with another person? How do I be there with them? I think another place you'll hear in Christ's story a little bit of that reflection language is right when he meets, I believe, the apostles after resurrection. He meets them on the road and he walks up and he says, I see you look downcast and you're walking. He starts a reflection before he gives information. Now he could have walked up. I mean, you know that the apostles were downcast and sad because they thought Christ was dead. I'm sure he knew the information. He could have given them information right out of the front. He could have walked up and said, hey, right here, guys, no need to be sad. But he doesn't. He walks up and finds out where they're at, and then he explores how to help. But he waits until they're ready to receive the information. He bonds with them, he connects, and then he waits until they're ready for receiving the information before he provides the information. He waits and gives them the information when they're ready to take it in. And he starts with the reflection first. And I often think this is a good example for us, that we can start our communication with a reflection first. Be sure, check for understanding. Be sure that we're getting the information. If we notice the listener seems pretty worked up, go ahead and reflect 2 or 3 times until they've indicated that you have that information they needed, that they wanted to share with you. Another thing I can do if I'm like, hey, I really have something I need to say, like I want to defend myself or I want to add more information, sometimes I'll tell them, hey, this sounds like something important's happening to you right now. I want to learn about that. I do have something I could add to this discussion, but I'm just going to jot it down and let's stay with your story. And then I'll circle back to that after I've heard this. Now, sometimes if I listen well and I go through that journey with them, I find the things I needed to add, they actually solved themselves. And we didn't need that information, or it changed as we walked that journey together and they showed me some things that might have been important to them. So listening well, reflective listening can be very powerful. Remember, it starts with a good sensory data statement. I hear, I see. Very often you get a lot of powerful movement if you can tag that feeling word they're giving you. Hey, I see you're sad. And they'll often tell you more information without you asking. Like you notice that if I describe something, like just saying, hey, I see you picked a blue shirt, that listener will often lean into telling me more about the shirt, why they picked it, how they picked it, why it's their favorite shirt, whatever it is. If I say, hey, it looks like you're sad, well, that listener will often just automatically start giving me more information about it without me having to direct the witness. And they'll frequently tell me something I didn't know or take me in a direction that I didn't realize we were going to connect to. So it really expands them in my world. I think sometimes we naturally do this with our teenagers in a way that we struggle to do with our spouses. Like you may go up to your teenager's bedroom and you don't launch into, after a long day, I don't go up to my teenager's room and say, let me tell you about my job and how tough my day is. I start by expanding their world. I walk in and go, hey, it looks like you're listening to some music. Reflective statement. And then they'll start telling me about that music sometimes. And so I just reflect and walk the journey with them and expand their world and mine. And before you know it, you feel less lonely at the end of that when I make more room for them. A lot of times I think what couples really want is to be seen by the other and have this gift of just listen to my story without always solving it. I've been known to walk into my husband and go, hey, I just need a cheerleader for this one. I just need you to go, you go girl, you've got this, and reflect and share my experience. I don't always need those solutions. Often, especially if you have adults like your partner or adult children, often rushing to give our advice is interpreted as criticism or like you don't think I'm capable. And so it's easy to start with, I think, a reflective statement to be sure I understand the situation before I go for information giving. And what I tell my clients, when they're first learning to do this reflective listening, is I tell them, calm your anxiety. I know sometimes your partner had a bad day. It might make you anxious and you want to fix it for them so you don't have to feel anxious, but what they need, and often the solution is they need to tell you about it. So you have to calm yourself so that they can tell you the story of what's happened to them. And they need that companionship for you to just walk with them. So what I'll challenge my clients is I say, while you're learning reflective listening, go a week just practicing making your first statement a reflective statement. Somebody comes in and says, I need some water, is dinner ready? Go, oh, sounds like you're hungry. Sounds like you like some dinner. I'm hearing you're thirsty. Like start with that reflective statement and then move into just having the normal interaction is fine. If your partner brings you an I feel statement, start with a reflection first and check your understanding that you're getting the message they're trying to communicate before you launch into interpreting. Next time we talk, we'll work a little bit on how to manage that interpretive voice and just stay present a little bit further. So I'll cover that in a later session. And I tell people, I said, if you could try to start with that reflection first, I said, it's just like learning Spanish. If I told you, make your first comment to your family a Spanish statement, well, you're going to learn Spanish. And you're also going to find it hard to do every single time. But if I give you that challenge, you might do it 20% more. And that's going to teach you more about using that language of feelings and connecting in that feeling realm, especially if you can tag that I hear a feeling, I see a feeling, and really connect and reflect on that feeling they're giving you and coming to understand the meaning behind it. Again, I'm Dr. Lisa Eliason. Appreciate you tuning in today and talking to me about communication. This is stuff I get super excited about. And we'll talk about next time maybe a little bit what that reflection strategy might look like in sexuality and how to use it. Great to visit with you guys today, and let's get out there and practice our good listening and communicating skills.